Okay, hi everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's webinar on opening a GLAM Lab. There will be four of us today talking about digital and innovation labs within library and museum settings. We'll provide an introduction to the Booksprint methodology that allowed us to create the book, which is called Open a GLAM Lab, and we'll discuss the Booksprint itself. All four of us, myself, the host, and the three speakers, were participants in the Booksprint in September 2019. I'm Caleb Dervin from the University of Limerick. I'm also the team leader from the LIBER Digital Humanities and Cultural Heritage Working Group, and I'll be chairing this afternoon's webinar, and also providing a quick introduction to what GLAM Labs are. Sophie Carolyn Wagner, project manager at OMB Labs at Austrian National Library, is going to talk about the Booksprint methodology. Sarah Ames, who is the digital scholarship librarian at the National Library of Scotland, and the team leader on the LIBER Digital Humanities Working Group, will give you a look inside the book we created. And Mahendra Mahay, manager of the British Library Lab, will be talking about the global GLAM Labs community and why a Booksprint was necessary. So the webinar today is being recorded, and you'll all receive a link later to the recording and slides, which are also being put up on Zenodo. And you'll have an opportunity at the end to ask questions, which can be entered into the chat box. Again, I'll be giving a brief introduction to the area, followed by Mahendra, and then Sophie, and finally Sarah. After which you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. So what is a digital GLAM Lab, which is one of the things really at the center of the book. Labs act as experimental Labs act as experimental incubators within and for a variety of institutions, galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. There's some overlap with other digitally and computationally focused approaches, like those that you may find in the digital humanities, digital scholarship services and centers, and also things like emerging immersive technologies in libraries. But the notion of digital cultural heritage innovation labs has found a particular resonance over the past year. So labs really form a sort of place that allow people to experiment with digital collections and data. They often provide a space, both online or on site, to allow people to work with digitized or born digital collections and data. And I think, as you'll see from the speakers today, as important as the place itself are the people that run the space. In the book, we characterize these as labbers, And as you see here, there's a whole list of of adjectives that describe values and the sort of ethos that allow these people to do this work, which involves openness, experimentation, trying out new things, being willing to overcome institutional barriers, formalizing disobedience, acting as a change maker within organizations. I think there's a need for trust in organizations like this, which can ultimately be contagious. And as we suggest in the book, we sort of encourage people to seek your inner LIBER. And the collections within a GLAM lab are very, very diverse from all kinds of digitized material to 3D material, from text-based to older video material, things which are generally computationally tractable. And then I think the important point here is that there are people coming in and out to chat, to tinker, to transform, and to share. And equally important in the lab is a sort of intersection of the group of people. So you may have researchers, artists, entrepreneurs, engineers, and the interested general public who can all collaborate to create new collections, tools and services that will help transform the way culture and also knowledge are disseminated into the future. Experimentation and exchanges are open, iterative, and shared widely. And as you'll see from our three speakers today, one of the things that we argue in the book is that labs have a pivotal role in the transformation of GLAM organizations. And the book highlights the critical role of labs in changing the future of a digital cultural heritage. I'm now going to hand you over to Mahendra, who's going to talk a little bit about the global GLAM Labs community and the background to the book sprint.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mahendra Mahay, and I'm based at the British Library. And for the last 6 years, I've been running a lab, a GLAM lab called British Library Labs. And just going to give you a small flavor of what we've been doing there for the last 6 years. I think it was probably the first national library in the world to actually have such a kind of a lab. And in essence, what we were set up to do was to encourage people to experiment with our digital collections. And over the last 6 years, we've worked on nearly 200 projects, and we've worked with a variety of people like researchers, artists, entrepreneurs, educators, and importantly, our own staff. And the way we've worked with them is through a variety of means. Kind of a common expression that I have with a lot of the work I do, most of the work starts with a conversation. So nearly all the projects that we've worked on started with talking to a human being about doing something with our collections. But in a sort of more formalized way, we've organized competitions, awards, and collaborative projects. And some of the impetus to set up a global community really came from a sort of a desire to share our experiences of setting up these labs, running them, maintaining them, trying to ensure that they thrive, also trying to share experiences like mistakes. And so we've been very keen to sort of share our experiences with people everywhere. So I'm just going to sort of give a sort of personal view on why I think GLAM Labs exist and what kinds of challenges they address. And the first one really is many galleries, libraries, archives, and museums are spending a lot of money on digitizing or capturing digital things. And the big question really is about, so we've spent all this money investing in all of this, but who's actually using them and how are they being used? And what value and impact are they having? And how are we making them available to everyone to use? Setting up labs makes you focus on the sort of fundamental question of what collections do you actually have and how can you make them openly available or, if necessary, through various restrictions, on site only. So we've had to address questions like how to tell people online and physically and where to go to them. Often what we've learned is that people won't necessarily come to us. So often some of the work that GLAM Labs do is to put our collections on other alternative places where there's a higher probability that people may find our collections, like Wikimedia or the Internet Archive or Flickr or Tumblr or Instagram. Thirdly, we're looking at how we are and how we should be supporting our users, particularly those that want access to and experiment with our digital collections and data, either manually or computationally. As institutions, are we providing the right access, discovery to our collections and data? Are we providing the right advice, guidance, technical support, training? And as institutions, are we providing the right services, tools, and processes? And what we think we're facilitating is the possibility for people to explore the feel, shape, and patterns and looking for needles in haystacks in our collections, especially harnessing computational methods. Often GLAM labs are found within digital scholarship or digital humanities departments, but not always. And then also some of the work that we do is looking at circular value. So this idea of helping people to find, explore, and augment discovery in often messy cultural heritage data. And then if that data is augmented, trying to put that data back to improve discoverability. Often our collections, the way we provide access to our collections are not through computational access. So this can be quite challenging. And finally, a lot of the work that many of the labs do around the world are to discover hidden gems within our digital collections and data and in a way celebrate what's there, but also research and remix to create new culture and new experiences to inspire people and create joyful experiences through events and exhibitions, for example. So in 2018, there was, real sort of, I felt a very strong need to try to share these experiences in a sort of more formal way. And in the lead up to an event that we organised at British Library in September 2018, 2018, sorry, yes, we ran a survey where we sent a survey out to lots of places around the world, initially focusing on the library community, but we actually got responses from galleries, archives, and museums too, to really kind of get a picture of the kinds of things that people wanted to get support on. And I'm just going to give you a small flavor of that survey. By the way, the survey data is available via that Google link if you want to download it. But the basic fundamental picture we were able to get from the survey was that the need to have these labs seems to be growing. More and more institutions in the GLAM sector want to kind of have these things for some of the reasons I stated earlier. So here's just an example of why these labs have been set up. Primarily, a lot of our sort of respondents focused on the academic community and researchers, but often the labs were set up to support the institution's own staff, sometimes the general public, creatives, and software developers, and so on. Also, a finding was that many of the labs that we set up didn't always have dedicated physical spaces. It's only very recently, British Library Labs that we've actually got some dedicated physical spaces. So the point that Caleb said at the very beginning, labs can sometimes be virtual spaces as well as physical spaces. And another interesting finding, and I urge you to have a look at the data to sort of dig a bit deeper, but some institutions provide access to restricted digital collections and data. Sometimes these collections are only available on site due to legal restrictions, but sometimes other restrictions like moral, ethical, privacy issues. But many institutions didn't provide access to restricted digital collections. So just to sort of give you a sort of a flavour, through the labs community, we've been working with University College London, Qatar, and some students there, Soumya Salim and Fidelity Fury. And the hyperlink there to the tiny URL actually takes you to a Google spreadsheet of the various labs that exist around the world, or organizations that are thinking of getting labs. And I've also provided a link to some work that Wikimedia have been doing, especially Wikimedia Sweden, to try to kind of map the GLAM's landscape. And the work that Wikimedia Sweden have been doing, they've mapped a huge number of cultural heritage institutions, nearly 70,000. And I think that visualization there shows how they've augmented a lot of the data through the sort of the purple dots. But you can see it's a kind of a growing phenomenon. So why form GLAM Labs community? Well, there wasn't really something that existed to serve this particular community of practice. And really, the idea was to bring people together, to share their experiences, how to plan, set up, run, and try to ensure that these labs thrive to increase our joint understanding. And importantly, to share all these experiences so we didn't reinvent the wheel. And really, okay, I will check that link, Margaret. Really, the idea of coming together is to try to make our labs the best they can be. And some of the sort of principles we've been trying to share, the values, are really about openness and genuine willingness to share, and sort of, be supportive, kind, and nice. And I think through the work that we've been doing, and I'll sort of talk a little bit about that, it's professionally rewarding to meet other colleagues who are doing things in a similar space. And also we can benchmark what we're doing compared to what our colleagues are doing in terms of how they're resourcing their labs. And there's been opportunities to provide mentoring and facilitate collaboration opportunities, kind of increase capacity, sort of, the sum is greater than the whole. And importantly, to kind of get an idea of what everyone's doing and to shamelessly steal each other's ideas. I'm trying to go to the next slide. Oops, sorry. Nearly done. Oops. One back, sorry. So in London 2018, we held an event called British Library Labs, and it was a 2-day event. And really, the idea was to bring people together, and it was very much a doing event. And I kind of had this concept of, imagine getting all these experts together and sticking a USB stick into their brains and downloading all their expertise and experiences, and so we could share it. So we had lots of varied sort of formats, like discussions, lightning talks, longer talks, and debates. And at that event, we had more than libraries that attended, so we started to get other people from other communities. And by the end of the event, we had over 100 pages of notes. And at the very end, I think the final session, we thought, wouldn't it be great to put this into some kind of book? And we're all busy people, so we kind of explored the idea of doing it through something called a book sprint, which is effectively where you get lots of interested people together and you lock them away for a week and they can't leave until they've written a book. And my colleague Sophie is going to talk more about that experience in a minute. We then held another event in Copenhagen in Denmark, where we dug a little bit deeper. Again, It was very much a doing event. We also used the Chatham House rule, which meant that people could say what they want and it wouldn't necessarily get reported. So people could be very honest and about some of the challenges they faced. And I think for many people that was very liberating. And that sort of through that and through lots of networking and collaborations, especially with UCL Qatar, we were able to finalize a book sprint, which was organized in late September in Doha in 2019. And it was over 5 days. And we got 16 people together, locked in a hotel room. And we had other teams who were helping us through the book sprints organization, who were helping us when we were sleeping, doing things like editing, proofing, and providing illustrations. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sophie, who's going to go into a bit more depth of the experience and the methodology and what we learned from it. Over to you, Sophie.
Hello, thank you, Mahendra. Thank you, Caleb, for the introduction. I'm going to speak a little bit about the actual book sprint in Doha. Yeah, so what was quite surprising, as Mahendra said, we had the first Building Library Labs event only a year before that. And again, as with labs in general, with the energy of, well, just one person inspiring other people to spend their energy in organizing this, we met only a year after the first meeting to write a book in 5 days, which sounds insane, and it was. So yeah, we were 16 people from I think 13 institutions, probably just as many countries, who came together in this hotel and didn't really know what to expect. I think none of us have ever taken part in a book sprint before, but were open to take part in this experiment and actually quite excited about it. The book sprint was a supervised process. So book sprint is a format that originated actually from software development. Floss manuals were written in books with the book sprint method. And we were supervised by a company, booksprints.net, by one supervisor who is present physically, who you can see there at the left, who guided us through the process. Right. Here you go. So we didn't really know what to expect. We started with a big, quite free brainstorm where we thought about what we wanted to talk about in our book, whom we are writing this book for, how we could structure it, how we could cluster ideas. As diverse as the group was, as diverse our backgrounds. Yes, we all come from GLAM Labs, but as Mahendra has pointed out, what a GLAM Lab can be, if that is a physical space or just a digital one, if the institution in the background is a gallery or a library or museum, that varied quite a bit. However, we did quite soon realize that we wanted to produce something helpful, and that we had a lot to talk about, and that the overlap between our work is definitely much greater and much more interesting than the differences. So after collecting a huge amount of ideas, as you can see in the background, we had what felt like thousands of post-its about topics that we wanted to speak about. We were then guided through what to do next. We were slowly, which was also, funnily enough, a bit controversial, I would say, because it also felt a little bit like there was some information asymmetry as to what comes next. I do understand the point of it, and I did back then as well, and I think we all kind of did. But it was also a bit of an irritation that we felt like we are only told what comes next as a next step sometimes. But I can see that it was also part of the strategy to have us focused on the next step and not the end of the whole thing, which is then going to be the book, which probably would have been a bit overwhelming if you tried to do that in just 5 days. One of the first steps, even though we kept on coming back to it in the first few days, was prioritizing what the kind of book is that we want to write, what voice we want this book to have, and what kind of style we're aiming for as well. I think we quite soon understood we wanted to write something that is accessible and helpful. We didn't want to write an academic book. We wanted it to be something useful. Hence the decision to go with a handbook, um, and we wanted it to be helpful for people that either wanted to start or were just envisioning at this point, or are already running a lab. So it was kind of targeting people that work in these environments or want to work in these environments. And we also wanted it to be something that you can come back to if at some point your lab transforms, and you needed some advice or some input for ideas. So we wanted it to be something that you keep on picking up if you need it. It started off after we kind of like settled on what the general ideas that we wanted to work on a lot of individual writing. We started with having a sub chapter each assigned, and we were already grouped in groups. However, we started off with writing them by ourselves, but then quite soon after that, rotating these subchapters. One of the side effects, which was great for me, and I think for most of us, is that given the rotation between these subchapters, you didn't really have any ownership. So you kind of like let go of this ownership that you sometimes have if you write individually. We soon also started using the Booksprint software, which is essentially some sort of collaborative writing software. Don't know whether that's correct because technically only one person could work on one thing at the same time. But it also allowed the editors that Mahendra mentioned before. I think there were two of them based in Australia, although not 100% sure that is true. But they were definitely somewhere else in the world, so they could correct or edit overnight. And we had an illustrator who really quickly came up with illustration ideas, sent them over throughout the day so we could see if that is something that is useful for us. So yeah, that was the Bookprint software. As I said, we kept on rotating the bits that we wrote. We revised, we rewrote, we restructured. We kept on going back and forth between various chapters and pretty much working on the whole book, each and every one of us. We were usually in groups that also changed, so it wasn't the same group for the whole thing. At least in the last few days, these groups mixed and intermingled. And we've been mostly working in these groups on one chapter in various subjects and rotated these in the groups, rotated the groups after. So there was a lot of rotation going on. Also, part of that rotation was integrating the external reviews, which to a large extent were copy editing, but also just like gave us ideas like, hey, there's something missing there, or this is a repetition there. So those were the ones who had like overviews early on. When we then finished all of our sections, when we felt like we had when we had all of our chapters together, we did 3 cycles of reviewing the book, which essentially meant that each and every one of us personally was revising pretty much the whole book eventually. And another element that has then been introduced to us were the target readers. So after finishing these 3 rounds of revisions, a group of 4 target readers, I was one of them, did read the whole book, which is as exhausting as it sounds. Even though obviously lovely that you get to read the whole thing, but we sat together, the four of us, in front of a big screen and essentially wrote the whole book out to each other, revising everything that we thought needed revision. So yeah, it was a very exhausting, very lengthy process, but lo and behold, 5 days later, what must have been hundreds of liters of coffee and loads of hummus, we had a book. And we were very excited, very exhausted, but very excited about it. And about the said book, Sarah Ames, my colleague, will speak a bit more. So I hand over to Sarah now.
Hello, thank you, Sophie, and thanks, Caleb and Mahendra as well. I'm Sarah Ames, and I'm responsible for digital scholarship at the National Library of Scotland, where I'm the digital scholarship librarian. I also participated in the book sprint along with my colleagues here, and I'd echo everyone in saying that it was a great experience, both in terms of being able to participate in a big team effort and contribute to the community, this community-written book, but also to learn so much from colleagues around the world from the GLAM Labs community that Mahendra has been describing. So I'm going to talk a bit about the book itself. The first time that we saw the book, it was actually a cake, which I'm sure you'll agree is the best kind of book that there is. You'll see in the photo there, we had a cake produced by Milena Dobreva, who was one of the book sprint organisers, as a surprise for when we finished writing the book. But here is the actual book, a bit less tasty, but it's just as nice a cover, I think. We went with the title, Open a GLAM Lab. We wanted to be as inclusive as possible to include galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. One of our contributors, for example, is in the museums sector. And we all feel very strongly about the values of openness more broadly. And of course, we strongly advocate for others to open labs in their organisations too. So it all seemed to be a good fit. Inside the book, there's a list of sponsors and contributing organisations, and there's the overall contents page as well. So you'll see that from the early brainstorming activities that Sophie was describing, the book has ended up with quite a clear structure, taking the reader from the very beginning of what a GLAM Lab is, with an introduction to labs, through to how to build and design one, how to set up a team, different communities that labs work with, how collections as data fits in with this work, the role of labs as a transformative influence in cultural heritage, how to fund and sustain a lab, and then also what the future holds for labs and lab work. So a few highlights I've chosen to pick out include the first chapter, which defines GLAM Labs and really sets them in context and helps to make clear the differences and similarities between labs in national and state libraries, university libraries, museums, galleries, archival libraries, and even the work of individual labbers as well. So this chapter, I think, really underpins the rest of the book, and this is crucial understanding for setting up a lab in the first place. The chapter on funding and sustainability is also really useful if you want to make the case for a lab. So often one of the most difficult aspects of labs work is gaining funding and justifying continuation of that funding as well, and creating a sustainable model to continue labs work. So this chapter really helps with this. It even offers example budget breakdowns, and it discusses other models for labs, such as temporary short-term labs, which are then disbanded and dissolved into organisations, and how to manage these well as well. The GLAM Labs Teams chapter gives some great information about team structures and roles in labs based on the findings of existing GLAM Labs. So it also features interviews with 3 real-life labbers, one of whom is Mahendra, who's presenting today, and it provides insight into their motivations, into their day-to-day work and experience, which can help to pinpoint the kind of roles and the kind of people that you may be looking for when you set up a lab. And the transformation chapter discusses, unsurprisingly, I guess, the transformative nature of labs and lab work, So labs don't only work on services and on projects, but they're also organisational change makers too, working at the forefront of technologies, digital methods, and digital collections. So having a labs team really helps to accelerate change within an organisation, and this chapter sets this out. There's also a number of kind of fun features breaking up the text as well. As Sophie said, we didn't want this to be an academic book. We wanted it to be one that people could use and relate to as well. So there's recipes for ideal concoctions needed to turn collections into data, for example. While they're a bit tongue-in-cheek, there's definitely truth behind them. They're still important and valuable. And the book is also peppered with examples, so it doesn't take off into the realms of theory. So this is a book about practical advice by real-life labbers. The book shares examples of projects that have gone well and some that haven't gone as well, approaches taken by different labs around the world too. And another feature to note is licensing. So we agreed as a group to license this CC0, so we waive all right to copyright. And we really agreed that this fits with our principles of openness, sharing, co-creation, recreation. So in true labs fashion, you're welcome to go ahead and make use of this book, change it, build upon it, improve our work. And there's also a nice introduction to the book, which sets it in context. Excuse me. So Open a GLAM Lab, the book, it isn't perfect, but we hope that it's a really useful starting point to equip people with information on how to set up a lab. We wanted to share our knowledge with the community and to make it easier for others to get started too. So it's a melting pot of ideas and strategies which we produced in a really short space of time, which actually nicely reflects the lab's mentality of giving things a go and trying new ways of working. There's also some annexes to the book which provide further reading, information about data formats that are used in providing collections as data, crucially acronym explanations, and also information about book sprints more generally if you're interested in that. So the book was published in October 2019 and it's available on our new GLAM Labs website, which you'll see at the top of the page there. On this website, you can download the book as an ebook, as a PDF or an EPUB. And we're also gathering the locations of all the labs around the world. And you can add your organisation and your lab to the map. So please do on the website. We're really keen to find out who else is doing this kind of work or who's planning to do this kind of work. So that we can grow our community and gain new perspectives and learn from others and also share our learning too. So there's the opportunity to join an email list, there's a Slack channel, there's a WhatsApp group, we have regular Zoom meetings and there's a Twitter account as well. So there's loads of ways to engage with and participate in this growing community. Impact-wise, the book's already had about 3,000 views, which we're quite amazed by. It seems to have been very popular. We've had 2 translations, which will be released soon in Arabic and Bulgarian. We've got Russian and Spanish, which are on the way as well. We've had a lot of website views. And we've also a number of attendees from the book sprints and colleagues who attended as well and participated have given talks about their experiences. So if you're interested to learn more, get in touch with us. And it's likely that one of our group will be able to chat with you further or present to your organisation about our experience of this book sprint week in Doha. There's also a page on our website with a number of blog posts written about the event, which is really useful, I hope, for further reflection on the approach used and the output that we produced. So we hope the future is bright for labs and the lab community. There's a lot of different activity plans. We've got the book being presented as a poster at DHN 2020. There's going to be an Africa Labs event hosted in Egypt in June, and hopefully one in Australasia, in Australia in hopefully September. And there's also a meetup of the International GLAM Labs community at the Library of Congress in May, with a call for papers that's currently open. So there's a link on the page on the slide there. We really hope that this book encourages and inspires others to set up an innovation lab in their organisation and helps to provide those first pieces of guidance that are needed. So we're an open and welcoming community, so do sign up to our mailing list, keep in touch, let us know if you have future plans in this area, and we'll hopefully look forward to meeting you at a future event. So now, if you've got any questions or any comments or discussion points, or you'd like us to expand on anything, please do let us know. And I'll hand back to Caleb.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Sophie, Sarah, and Mahendra. I see that there's already a couple of questions in. So there's a question about where to sign up for the global map, which you can do on the website, and I'm just sending you the link now through the chat. There's another question about how many of the labs in the map have active GLAM Lab activity. Would you like to answer that, Mahendra? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think the lab is the member map is really there's no official kind of membership as such. It's really about anybody who is working in an organization that even maybe is interested in labs, and to kind of put a flag in the ground to say that they exist. So there's no formal membership or anything like that. I would say it ranges from people wanting to plan a lab to those actually running labs. So I think it covers the whole range. We've done a sort of proper breakdown, but there is a link to a Google spreadsheet which is a little bit more detailed, and then there's also the work from finding GLAMs from the Wikimedia community, which doesn't really have a labs focus, but at least sort of provides a sort of a detailed map of those out there. So for us, I suppose our target audience are all cultural heritage institutions around the world that are either already have digital collections or wanting to do things with their digital collections.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mahendra. So there is another question from Amber about our funding and a sustainability chapter, and whether it covers issues around university-run labs as well as those run by GLAM organizations. I can maybe take a stab at this question, working in a university myself, just to say that some of the examples that we give in the book are certainly generalized from the experience of people that do work in university labs, as well as state libraries and other types of organizations. So yes, there is some general information there about labs that are run by universities. I don't know if any of the other speakers can comment on that as well.
Hi, Caleb. Yeah, I'd agree that we've provided a broad overview, which we hope will be useful to all. But in terms of funding and sustainability, the chapter looks at, for example, the pros and cons of trying to gain short-term funding to just give your lab a kickstart, and then the fact that you'd have to then seek further funding afterwards, or whether it's worth building together a big business case to get institutional funding for the longer term. So it's weighing up a few different elements, which I think can be valuable whether you're a university-based lab or a national library-based lab, for example. I think Mahendra looks like he's about to say something too.
No, all I was going to add, Sarah, really was that probably the best way to get information about this is to connect with those people who have set up labs or wanting to set up labs in universities, because I think that's kind of how our network has grown anyway, because lots of people, I remember in the early days, came to me and sort of said, oh, how did you set up your lab? And so, for example, on the British Library Labs website, there's actually a link to our proposals. Our funding came from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation originally, but we're now transitioning to core money directly from the British Library. But there may be things in there that you might be able to use as a bit of a shopping list, kind of, because obviously every institution is going to be different, but there may be things in there and ideas that you could probably pinch and use in your own context. and obviously just connecting with people who've already done it.
Okay, thank you, Mahendra. I have a question that I'd actually like to ask all three of the speakers, which is how is writing the book and going through the whole book sprint experience, has it had an effect on your own practice and your own experience as somebody working in a lab? If you'd like to answer that.
Shall I go first? Is anyone else?
Yeah, you go.
Oh, okay. For me, it's been a fantastic experience. So I'm less than a year into my role at the moment. We've been putting a lot of work in at the National Library to set up a digital scholarship service. And so it was a chance for me, firstly, to meet experts in the field, to gain loads of knowledge from them, but also contribute what I could at that point, which was at an early stage of setting something up. It's really meant that I've got a wonderful community of people that I can ask questions of, and who provide guidance to me when I don't necessarily always have that within my organisation, because this is a new area. It's a new area for libraries and GLAMs to understand. So there's a lack of understanding in this area. So it's a great community to be a part of. I think mulling through a lot of the topics as well, and gradually finding the order within them in the process of writing has been good in clarifying in my mind where the priorities are for us as well. So yeah, I think it's been a fantastic experience from my side.
I can go next if you like. Well, I just will. Yeah, no. I think writing the book and having that experience was, in itself, I mean, the situation was quite surreal. Spending a week together with people that, you know, some of them I've never met before. Some of them I knew a bit, but obviously, you know, not too closely, given that they were from all over the world, and spending these many hours together, having every meal together, and essentially we had working days of like 16, 17, 18 hours in the very end. It was intense, but it was really fruitful. It was wonderful to see that the people that work in labs actually take it to heart to be open for experimentation, and didn't let their egos get in the way, but actually were willing to try something entirely new for them, and take part as much as they can, and just be generous with their knowledge. And the community that exists around the book, that has been built from this event in London and has grown ever since, is extremely helpful, and very happy to engage even in questions that might feel silly to you in the moment that they're posing themselves, but are then just like really generously happy to help with whatever kind of problem. So it definitely has and still does impact my work life hugely. So thank you. I'll let Mahendra speak for a bit.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to maybe just add a couple of things. I think the idea of the book sprint was faintly terrifying and very scary. And I think I'm not ashamed to admit I had a few wobbles over the 5 days, and also the idea of things being part of sort of collective wisdom, and you kind of had to let go of your ego and your contributions. I think that was very powerful, and I think challenging for quite a few people. Just like to sort of say it's probably one of the best things I've ever done in a professional context. I'd even dare to say I'd do it again. But I think it's sort of had a great experience in terms of its sort of legacy, in terms of there were things in the book that I've actually used myself. So, for example, following sort of design principles, which we didn't really do when we first started out in our lab. It's kind of made me rethink about a lot of the things that we do. But I thought it was a very rewarding thing to do, and I would urge people to do it.
Okay, thank you all very much for your very candid answers. Do any of today's webinar attendees have any more questions or any questions? If not, I might just ask a follow-up question to that one. I wonder if maybe the three speakers would be willing to briefly share some project that they're currently working on in their labs, just to give a flavor of the type of work that we are describing in the book. Mahendra, would you like to?
Yep. I mean, we get involved in lots of different random projects, but just to give you a flavor of one that I'm working on right now, I'm working with an Italian artist who is setting up her residency in a study carrel in a reading room. And she is working with collections that are only available and accessible on site. So we've developed these digital research spaces in the reading room, which are lockable study carrels, which are sort of glass fronted. And she's been working on mixing our digital collections, image collections, with the Wellcome Trust's digital collections. And she is mashing those up and presenting them on the glass. And she's documenting that and putting it on social media. That's just one random project that I'm working on at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Mahendra. Sarah, would you like to comment?
Sure, yes, thanks. So we currently have an artist in residence at the National Library of Scotland. It's funded through a University of Edinburgh AHRC funded creative informatics project. And he is called Martin Disley. He's on a 9-month funded residency. I think he's maybe 3 months in at the moment. And he is a new media artist. And he's exploring our digital collections. He's using machine learning techniques like GAN, generative adversarial networks, to create whole new interpretations of our collections based on our digitized material. So he's been doing some initial exploratory work on our images of bridges that we have in the collections, and he's now moving on to some of our map collections as well, and he's doing some short-term projects, and hopefully there'll be a bigger piece at the end too. So that's been really exciting for us, and it's great to see new forms of engagement with the collections that we wouldn't have previously done.
All right. Yeah. Let me just add a few things from my side. Like, we are in a challenging situation. We have been in a challenging situation because the developer who's also been part of the book sprint, and my team member at OMB Labs has not prolonged his contract here and ended his time with us here by the end of last year. And the second developer who's here part-time for Bring Your Project, a little thing that I might explain in a second, also ended her working contract by the end of the year. So I was a bit alone for a moment, and I've now 2 new team members. So we're just kind of trying to restructure this and find out how we can work together a bit more. But I'm excited that I have a new colleague in the team for the Bring Your Project. Yeah, it's a bit of a silly name, but the idea of that is that people working with the Austrian National Library's collections or the OMB lab services and have technical difficulties can get time of a developer from our team and get help if they need it, and they don't need to pay for that service. The only question we ask is that they try to learn what said developer is trying to create, and so therefore they kind of like have knowledge transfer coming with this. So this is quite exciting. I've just like my colleague Philip, who's sitting in the same office with me as we speak, is now trying to fill this position, and there are quite a few projects coming up where he's trying to support people coming from various areas, and try to work with the Austrian National Library's collection. And the second thing that I'm probably mentioning is we also have an art project that is going to be soon going to be released on labs.omb.ac.at, our URL, when artists used artificial intelligence to create sound based on some measurement structures coming from a newspaper of the 19th century, which was the OMB Labs challenge, and he won that. So that is soon going to be released. Watch out for that.
Okay, thank you all very much again. Looks like we have another question that's just come through. In order to establish a GLAM lab, should I have digital collections, or can I simulate the lab in another way? Mahendra, would you maybe like to answer that?
I suppose, we've been quite specific about what we define as a GLAM lab. I think in the context of this, we've said labs that actually, so institutions that have actually already got digital collections or capturing them. But I previously presented at an event that my colleague Milena organized in Zambia, and one of the questions that was asked there was, what if your institution doesn't have any digital collections or anything at all? How would you start a GLAM lab? And what if you don't have any money? And my answer to that was, well, you can actually do quite pretty good digitization with a mobile phone. And I said, just choose something interesting in your collections that you're allowed to take a copy of and take a picture of it, and then put it on a platform that allows you to put it up for free. So things like Flickr Commons or Tumblr or Instagram or Wikimedia, and that's where you could start. So I don't know if that answers the question, but so I suppose the answer is that you don't have to have something that's in digital form, but obviously it would be good to start that process.
Could I add also that many universities, for example, have maker spaces too, which are related to labs, maybe not identical. And there's where people may work with digital representations of collections, but they also can work with physical collections. They can produce physical data visualizations almost of collections. So I think there's a few other ways as well that you can engage with labs type experimental work, as Mahendra says already.
Actually, just to add something, Sarah, to that, even though we're a library, we actually capture pictures of like 3D photogrammetry of physical objects. So if you're a museum, I imagine that you may have things like that, but we've been experimenting with providing access to pictures of objects in 3D that people could do experiments with as well.
Okay, thank you. Just as we're nearing the end of the hour, I might just ask if there's any more questions, and if there's not, thank Mahendra, Sarah, and Sophie for today's webinar. Slides and a recording will be sent to everybody that did register for today. So
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Caleb, for hosting this too.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all from my side as well. Thank you, Caleb, for hosting. Thank you, Martina, for organising.
Yep.
Thanks, Mahendra and Sarah, for your input. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Have a great week, everyone.
Okay, thank you again, guys.